Good evening, Crypt Keepers, and welcome to Cryptique, where we discuss all things paranormal, occult, UFOs, metaphysical, hidden history, forbidden archaeology, and all things truther. I'm joined, as always, by my podcast partner on this journey through the cosmos, Chief Corncob. How you doing?
Chief Corncob. I'm doing good, man. I've been to, I think it's Washington, Missouri, where they still make corncob pipes.
Oh, yeah.
I think I read that like Mark Twain got his corncob pipes there.
Nice. Corncob pipes and walnut bowls you can find in rural Missouri. For those that don't know, when you're driving like from St. Louis to Mizzou, there's literally like 30 billboards on the side of the highway that says walnut bowls, exit, whatever. It's like, are they that popular that like you buy all these billboards and it really pays off? Like people come in and they're like, I need 57 walnut cereal bowls stat. I doubt it. But
and then they get back on the highway and they're like, man, I wish I had bought another. And then they look up and see the sign.
Yeah. Well, and they see them on the way back too. So
yeah. So the kids have already tossed one of them out the window. They can stop and get another one. I'm just justifying here. I'm helping with the marketing. I'm on the take from Big Walnut Bowl.
Oh man, it's always been a competition, walnut bowls and corncob pipes. So if you only have money for one, what are you going with?
Bowls.
Okay, probably hold their value better.
Probably. Let's just move on.
All right, tell them what they need to know.
All right, please like, subscribe, share, interact with it however you can through your particular platform. It helps us with the algorithm, but sharing it with somebody who you think will like it is the best way and the most natural way for this to grow. All of our socials are going to be in the show notes. You can let us know what you want to hear at cryptiquepodcast@gmail.com or tell us how awful it is or how much you like or dislike our backgrounds. And you can check out what we're selling at cryptiquepodcaststore.com and help us keep the servers on at buymeacoffee.com/cryptiquepi.
All right.
Tonight I'm leading off with one of your suggested topics, which is the Mantell UFO incident. So this is considered one of the classic UFO cases since it took place during the 40s. It was around the time of Roswell and all that. But it's not one that I was very familiar with. I know there have been specials on it, like Sightings used to be a show that was on. I think you can find that on YouTube. They have episodes about this. And even that, I find that a lot of the documentary type shows pretty badly mischaracterize some of the aspects of the story based on the notes that you have on this, what I was able to find out through my own research. But essentially, this is a story that starts on January 7th of 1948 at Godman Army Airfield in Fort Knox, Kentucky. So there was a basic training exercise going on, from what I've been able to gather, involving some P-51 fighters from the Air Force National Guard base. And during this, an object was spotted. So a circular object measuring 250 to 300 feet in diameter was spotted. These were reports from the Kentucky Highway Patrol near Madisonville, and they described it as moving westbound. Owensboro and Irvington also reported this same phenomena or object or entity. There are a lot of different words used to describe it. Eyewitnesses in an air traffic control tower or some kind of, some equivalent from back in the 40s, described a stationary object being very white and about 1/4 the size of a full moon, which is kind of strange.
That's a weird way to characterize something. Like, you would say, oh, we think it was 100 feet, across or whatever. You're not like, well, picture a car tire only 75 times bigger. That's how big it was. It's like, come on, give me a normal reference point.
Yeah, so this was around 1:45 that Sergeant Quentin Blackwell, stationed in the control tower at Fort Knox, observed this. and I think it was Colonel Guy Hicks who reported it with the full moon thing, which I guess I kind of get. It's like a perspective thing. They're not sure how far away it is. They're just saying this is the size it appears to be.
Right.
Through binoculars, they reported that it appeared to have a red border at the bottom and remained motionless for 1.5 hours. Observers at the Clinton County Army Airfield in Ohio reported the object as a flaming red cone, trailing a gaseous green mist, which was visible to them for about 35 minutes.
Wow.
So that's...
Doesn't sound like a weather balloon so far.
It doesn't exactly sound like a weather balloon. Yeah, so this is where Mantell gets involved. Captain Thomas F. Mantell was a 25-year-old pilot from the Kentucky Air National Guard and pursued this. Now, some accounts make it sound like they were on the ground, weren't in the air yet. Others that I've found say that they were coming back from some kind of training exercise, but they weren't armed or anything. They weren't prepared to kind of go into any sort of combat situation. But they did go to intercept this thing or try to figure out what was going on.
Yeah.
So for... did I say P-51?
P-51 Mustangs, yeah.
Yeah, P-51, I think it's a P-51D specifically,
okay.
But I'm not super familiar with the models.
But they were like state-of-the-art for the time. Yeah,
the P-51 first came out in like 1940, so these are fairly recent. But they were of Sea Flight, the 165th Fighter Squadron of the Kentucky Air National Guard. And they were already airborne. Mantell and 2 other pilots engaged in a steep pursuit of the object, ignoring what the tower was telling them, that they should try to level their altitude and get a clearer view of what this thing was. They were not prepared to go very high. Even back then, some of the planes were capable of reaching altitudes at which a pilot would not be able to breathe. So one of the wingmen, Lieutenant Albert Clemens, had an oxygen mask but didn't have a very long-lasting supply.
Right.
So Clemens and the third pilot, Hammond, abandoned the chase at 22,500 feet. But Mantell kept going, and he was the last one to keep pursuing this object.
Right.
And as far as we know, there's no fire exchanged. There's no combat. There's nothing like that going on. There are sources that claim that he was saying things over the radio, like, I'm still in pursuit, I can't catch up to it, it's getting away from me, comments like that. But I don't believe there are any recordings of anything. And they were saying some of what he was saying was unintelligible. This is from interviews that I've seen with people who were around at the time, family members, friends.
Mm-hmm.
There's been obviously a lot of interest in it. We're talking about it now, so many years later.
Right.
But at about 25,000 feet, it appears that Mantell blacked out because of a lack of oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
And the plane fell back towards the ground in a spiral. Witnesses described the Mustang as coming down in a circling descent, ultimately crashing on a farm south of Franklin near the Kentucky-Tennessee border, which I found is actually not terribly far from where he was born. So that's kind of an odd detail. I think his sister mentioned it in one of the interviews that I watched, that he was born at a hospital in Franklin. Firefighters retrieved the body from the wreckage. They found the seatbelt shredded, and the watch that he was wearing stopped at 3:18 p.m., which was the time that the plane impacted. Around by 3:50 p.m., the UFO was no longer visible to the observers at Godman Army Airfield. So this was one of the incidents that really pushed the Air Force and the government and it as a whole to investigate these incidents.
Yeah.
And to look at whether or not UFOs were some kind of explainable phenomena that was just atmospheric that we didn't notice before, if it was some kind of craft that was coming from, who knows, the Soviet Union, some breakaway faction in Europe. I mean, it was right after a world war. So I think it's very reasonable to still be on your guard. I mean, the whole reason, from what I could tell, that Mantell was even in this was he was not ready to stop flying and doing the things that he was doing for the military.
Yeah.
But go on. Did you have something to say?
Well, I was just going to say, I don't recall any time before this that somebody died from a UFO. And obviously, we're not saying that, Mantell was attacked by this UFO. There's no record, like you said, of any exchange of fire or anything like that. But this was a UFO and a man did die.
Yeah. From the research that you have and what I've found, that was kind of the big deal about it. This was a UFO involved incident where somebody died.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of different stories and rumors going around. Some people were saying that his body was missing. It wasn't in the craft at all. That it was just he went up, plane came down, no pilot inside.
Yeah.
Which is actually really a compelling thing to imagine.
Yeah.
Some were saying that the body was riddled with bullets. Some were saying that the body and the whole aircraft was either highly magnetized or irradiated. But none of that seems to be substantiated in any way. And the Air Force claims that none of that was true. They say, yes, he went up. He was chasing this object and probably passed out because he didn't have an oxygen supply and he went too high and crashed.
Yeah.
It's according to some of the interviews that I saw, the Air Force really wanted to distance themselves from this. They didn't want a whole lot of coverage on it, so they tried to come up with an explanation. This was around what were the projects at this time?
Was it?
I think it was Blue Book at the time, but yeah, I think Blue Book was kind of just starting. But they initially tried to say that he was chasing Venus, that Venus was the object in the sky, which this reminded me so much of our episode on the Battle of LA, trying to say that these military guys were just like confused by clouds, or reflections of lights, like spotlights in the clouds. And it's like, really? And I was sitting out, I'm sure any night you can sit in your backyard and just look at the sky and be like, that's a star, that's a planet.
Yeah.
And I mean, you might not be able to tell which one it is, but they're really not going to be huge. They're not big enough to mistake for anything.
Yeah. You would think that their training would account for that. Like, hey, guys, just so you know, sorry we have to cover this, but that's the moon. Do not try and chase the moon down.
Do not chase the moon.
Sky.
Don't shoot it. So, all right, it was Project Sign at the time. That was the first research group that was kind of digging into these UFO reports. You know, how seriously they were taking that, who knows?
Yeah.
But Captain Edward Ruppelt, I'm not totally sure how to pronounce that name, who later supervised Project Blue Book, noted that Project Sign urgently responded to this. They really wanted to get an explanation quickly. So they were getting just bombarded with media inquiries, reporters trying to figure out what happened, and they were just trying to find something really quick. And there apparently was some previous incident in which an Air Force craft was chasing Venus somehow. And they just basically told the reporters that. They put out the word that Mantell lost his life attempting to reach the planet Venus. And it's unbelievable. Because this guy he was only 25, but this is 1948. He served in the military. He was a pilot.
Right.
From what I found, he wanted to be a fighter pilot, but at that time, I guess it wouldn't have really been the Air Force. It would probably been the Army Air Corps, whatever group it was. He was too tall to be a fighter pilot by military standards. So he flew planes that would drop gliders to deliver troops. So he was doing that like in Normandy and things like that. There are pictures of one of the planes that he was flying that, I mean, he flew in, the plane was hit multiple times. Most of the control surfaces weren't functioning. He was able to successfully deploy this glider, deliver these troops safely, and then get back to the base. And they were kind of like, I have no idea how you did this. This plane should not be able to fly. And it's like, if you shined a light on it, it almost wouldn't have a shadow. That's how like a little structure there was left of this plane by the time he got back. So this guy knew what he was doing. Obviously he was brave because he was going to keep going after this thing, whether he had anybody with him or not.
Right.
I mean, and he had experience with it. He also apparently either tried to start or did start some kind of flight school. So he's doing all this stuff because he wanted to fly. And he particularly liked being part of this squadron because he got to fly fighters, which is what he wanted to do. So this is not a guy it's not like they have a bunch of volunteers sitting around on a weekend and something comes up and they jump in these planes and take off not knowing what they're doing. Like this guy would not have mistaken a planet for an object. He wouldn't have been making comments like, oh, I can't catch up with it, or it's getting away from me. It doesn't really make any sense. And by 1952, This same guy that we were talking about before, Captain Ruppelt, who at the time was overseeing Project Blue Book, received orders to reopen the investigation into the incident. He then consulted with J. Allen Hynek, a name probably a lot of you listening know.
Yeah.
Who at the time was an astronomer at Ohio State University and a scientific consultant to both Project Sign and Blue Book. Hynek initially went along with the Venus explanation, but had decided against it by this time and said that there was just no way, given the atmospheric conditions at the time, that Venus could have put off some kind of light source or mirage that would have looked anything like what people were seeing, or anything like something that would trick an experienced pilot into trying to chase it.
And not like a flying traffic cone that's farting a green mist out behind it.
Yeah, with a red like highlight around it.
Right.
Yeah, it has really specific descriptions for it to be just like a mirage.
Yeah.
Because that's the only thing it could be, is something atmospheric that turned this little pinprick of light. But according to Hynek, Venus wasn't luminous enough to be seen by Mantell and the other witnesses who reported seeing the object, especially considering the significant haze that would have been in the sky at the time. Ruppelt highlighted the observation that even if Venus were visible, it would only appear as a pinpoint of light, contrasting with eyewitness descriptions that said that it was a large object. Because remember, 200, 300 feet in diameter. I mean, they could see details on it.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was taught to tell the difference between stars and planets, it was only that planets are going to be brighter and they don't appear to twinkle.
We could just leave it at that. They don't appear to twinkle. I do think it's funny that the playbook stays the same. I didn't hear them in this one talk about swamp gas or ball lightning yet, which I thought for sure would pop up. But they're not, the descriptions that they're giving of what it could be. It seems ridiculous because it is ridiculous. But if you say, "Oh, it's just a planet," 98% of the people will be like, "Oh, it was just a planet. I don't even need to look into it at all." And it works, and it worked, and it's sad because it still works. No. It was swamp gas. It was ball lightning. Don't even worry about it. Okay.
Yeah. So one possible explanation is that this is a weather balloon. At the time, the Navy was using classified balloons referred to as skyhook balloons that, from what I was able to find, carried different types of equipment, either weather measuring equipment or probably more likely something to do with espionage.
Sure.
Because why else would it be classified?
Right.
It doesn't make sense to be like, yeah, we're just measuring like air pressure and temperature and stuff like that. Like nothing.
We can't let you know what the barometer is over Kentucky right now.
Yeah.
Top secret.
So there was someone in Madisonville who used a telescope to look at it and said that it did look like a balloon to them. An astronomer at Vanderbilt University between 4:30 and 4:45 on that day said that they saw a pear-shaped balloon with cables and a basket when they viewed it through binoculars, but most of the other sources seem to agree that this thing was gone by 3:50. Okay. So it's possible that it's a weather balloon or one of these skyhook balloons, because they were made of an aluminum kind of material, and they would have been reflective. Yeah, something like that. And they would have been reflective, and that could have explained like the strange outline and things like that. But I'm not totally sure. It's kind of plausible, but the Navy says that they were constructed of a reflective aluminum type material, but they were about 100 feet in diameter. So big, but about a third the size of what they were estimating this thing to be. And yeah, some of the sources, well, actually, it looks like most of the sources are saying that this thing kind of just sat there.
Right.
Consistent with a balloon, but then
is it
3 or 4 fighter pilots who are unable to reach it with planes? Like they can't get there. They're not able to get either high enough to it, or if you believe some of the reports about what he was saying over the radio, it's moving away as they're approaching it.
Yeah.
So
now I could see if they said it was stationary, if there was a project or whatever where the balloon was tethered to the ground. But if it's at at whatever altitude, I would think the wind would be pushing it, but it's not going to push it faster than a P-51 could catch up to it. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
holding steady, I get how if something's moving really slow, sometimes it may appear to be stationary, but if you're chasing it in an airplane, it's obviously not stationary, and it's obviously moving faster than the wind could blow it. So I don't know. For me, that kind of like the weather balloon theory holds weight when you're talking about description and stuff like that. But in the actions, I don't think this thing behaves like a balloon at all.
Yeah, and it's a shame that we don't have more information about it.
Yeah.
How it behaved or what happened, since all the pilots except Mantell broke off, and then he died from the incident. But yeah, I feel like he wouldn't have pursued a balloon. I just feel like he wouldn't have. I don't know.
I feel like even in the 40s, that's something pilots would see all the time.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, I would think somebody who's been in war would be like balloon, parachute, something that's not like a piloted craft. Okay, this is not something we need to observe it, but maybe not be worried about it.
Sure.
So it does seem a little bit odd that he would be that gung-ho about going after it if it wasn't really something that was a problem. And trying to get information from the military about what was going on at the time, they could neither confirm nor deny that these balloons were being used. There were a few people involved in the Skyhook project who said that there were operations at Clinton County Air Force Base in 1947, but didn't necessarily say or maybe remember whether or not they were still doing anything in January of 48.
Right.
So they're saying, yes, there was stuff happening in that area around that time, but we can't say that there was anything actually on that date that would have explained it. So the last, and I think probably the least convincing cause of this whole thing would be inexperience with the P-51. Some researchers, or we might refer to them as debunkers, have said that he had, Thomas Mantell had extensive experience as a pilot, but was relatively new to the P-51. He did not fly it in the military because he was too tall for it, which I wasn't able to find how tall he was, because I've been in a P-51 before, and I'm 6'3", and there is no way that I could reach all the stuff you have to get to. I'm just way too big. Even when I was thin, I was just like, there's no way you could reach all this stuff. Like the height restriction actually makes a lot of sense when you see the control layout. But I'm guessing, I mean, he was born in 1922. He probably wasn't, 6'3" or 6'2" or whatever, depending on what convenience store I'm leaving. I don't know how tall I am. But yeah, I mean, he did fly it for this group, and he was teaching people to fly.
Right.
And he was an experienced pilot. So I don't find. Let's look at this explanation.
Break it down.
Jay was chasing an unidentified vehicle on the highway. And crashed his car and died. We think he was chasing a heat mirage and crashed his car because he was driving a Ranger instead of an S10.
Yeah.
That doesn't really make sense, but that's kind of what we're getting here. It's that he was confused. He was new to this aircraft. He didn't know what to do. It's like you would still know that you need oxygen to go that high. You still know the capabilities of the aircraft, even if you couldn't necessarily get to all the controls as efficiently as you might like to.
Well, you also
a whole lot, and he's a decorated veteran,
right? Yeah.
So I just feel like somebody like that who's been through everything he's been through he's not gonna get a call to action and be like, oh, I'll just jump in this plane. But sir, you don't know that plane. He's like, it'll be fine. I'll figure it out as I go.
Right. Yeah. They all had their personal aircraft, I'm sure. Maybe, like 3 people shared the same airplane as far as, like pilots go. Like, hey, your first shift, your second shift, your third
like
shift.
A motor pool kind of thing. Sure. Yeah. He flew a C-47, by the way. I'll try to throw a picture up of what that plane looked like by the end of that mission that I was talking about. But speaking of personal planes, I like the name of that plane that he had. It was apparently called the Vulture's Delight.
Nice.
It's like the most grim name I've ever heard for a warplane.
That's awesome.
It's good. But yeah, I mean, this is a guy who dealt with anti-aircraft fire, being shot at, going into active war zones in a plane that's not really meant to fight. I mean, you're basically busing people through an active war zone. And this guy's, I don't buy that he's getting confused and going after Venus or weird atmospheric conditions.
Well, it's like you said, it doesn't matter if you're a trained pilot. I would have to think that one of the first things that they would train you about is you can't go higher than this altitude without having oxygen, or you will pass out and possibly crash and die. It's not like they're saving that for the advanced bomber course.
Yeah.
You know what? Because it doesn't matter if you're on a helicopter, a hot air balloon, UFO. If you don't have oxygen at this altitude, you're not going to be able to breathe. Mm-hmm. And that's consistent and never changes. I'm sure it changes a little bit in different areas. You know, there's maybe more oxygen over this spot or whatever, but there's a critical mass where no matter what you're in, you're going to pass out at this altitude. Mm-hmm. And he knew that. And who knows what he was being told, but it's hard for me to believe that somebody would just completely deny direct orders and be like, no, I don't care if you say that I'm not supposed to do this. And I don't care that I don't have oxygen to go this high. I'm going to do it anyway. That's two things that I don't see an experienced and decorated pilot doing. Those things do not make sense to me at all. And you know that they know what was said. And there may be some stuff where he gets to a certain point where he's about to pass out and it's just blah, 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 you know. But I would like to know exactly what the exchange was between the plane, the tower, and whoever is in command of what these planes are supposed to be doing. Unless they said there was a complete communication failure too.
Yeah, they never said that there was like a communication failure. They just said that some of what he was saying was they couldn't really understand it. I mean, there would have been a lot of noise. It's not like we had today's technology back then. Yeah, and to your point of like he would have known what he was doing. I feel like he wouldn't have gone that high if he didn't think there was a point to it.
Right.
Like if he didn't think I can go up there for X number of seconds or minutes to see if I can get a little closer to it. He probably would have recognized this is my altitude. I can dip over this a little bit and get a closer look and then come back down. And the thing that I am kind of wondering and was thinking about during this whole thing is what do we hear over and over from UFO encounters with people in cars around this time, like 40s to the 60s and 70s? Car shuts down, car stalls, no particular reason why, just shuts off. Mm-hmm. And we know he goes up a certain height, no more communication, and then the plane just falls out of the sky.
I think it's weird that a plane that was traveling at whatever speed, and it's not like it was at Mach speeds or anything like that, but that it just kind of stops and just spins down, you know, like spiraling like a leaf falling out of a tree, as opposed to, you know, the aerodynamics of the plane making it either come, you know, like straight down or down at an angle, but not spinning. And I, you know, I'm not very experienced at all with, you know, aeronautical design or anything like that, but it seems odd to me that it would just spiral down instead of, you know, kind of coming down like a glider or just coming straight down.
Yeah, I mean, coming down in a spiral probably would just indicate that the control surfaces were not doing the same thing at the same time. The control surfaces at the back of the wings were probably at a different angle that would just cause it to tilt or spin. Yeah, it just sounds to me as though, I think if he was holding the yoke still, it would come down like you were saying. Like that to me would indicate that he still had some control over it. But the fact that it's spinning sounds to me like he was not like present really. He wasn't holding on to anything. He wasn't doing anything.
Yeah. I don't know. I would think that if you are flying the plane and you pass out, you would be likely, you know, you've got your hand on the joystick and then you pass out and you kind of have it go this way, or you pass out and it goes back a little bit, something like that. And then it's also possible that if this was a spacecraft from another dimension or another planet or whatever, it could have just zapped the controls and maybe electrocuted him or caused the plane to keep going up when, he was trying to level out. That's a possibility. I know it's a very slight pop, but
yeah,
that's what we're here for, man.
Yeah, it seems. I mean, when it comes down to it, and this will be my final thoughts, it seems like the assumptions that you're working towards are either an experienced veteran chased a balloon or a planet and flew so high that they passed out and were unable to recover in time to pull the aircraft out of a dive, or an experienced pilot went after what he perceived as some kind of enemy craft and was brought down in a way that made it look like he blacked out. I mean, those are kind of the two assumptions that we have to work with.
I just don't see a scenario where someone like that makes a move that puts himself in danger. Now, I could see it if there was now planes, they all have radar, they all have, different systems and things that they can use where everything's recorded, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we see in the Tic Tac UFO thing, the Navy pilot is trying to keep up with this thing, and it's on video, and that makes sense because, hey, we've got to get video of this thing. We got to figure out what it is. And I could see if his plane was outfitted with cameras that he might say, oh man, I got to do whatever I can do to get close to this thing to get the the shot I need. But just to chase what is probably a planet or a weather balloon, I think is silly. I don't see it. I mean, this guy's probably seen just about everything. And if he's like, holy crap, what is that thing? I have got to find it. I have to risk my life to figure out what this thing is to protect my country. It's not going to be a weather balloon, and it's not going to be Venus. And I think I have no idea how he came down. It could have been the lack of oxygen. It could have been that this craft did something to him, but I don't buy that it was Venus or a weather balloon that this hero was chasing, because he is a hero. Even if this was just Venus or a weather balloon, he's still a hero because he died trying to protect his country. And especially, like you said, where he was at, hey, these are my people. This is where I grew up. I've got family down there. I've got to figure out what this thing is to, protect my sister and my niece and my cousins. And so he's a hero, and I hate it when heroes are kind of dragged through the mud a little bit.
Yeah.
And I feel like that happened with this guy. Like, he should be remembered as an amazing pilot that gave his life for his country, not as some conspiracy theorist with he wasn't wearing his helmet and goggles in the plane. He was wearing his tinfoil hat. And it's like, dude, this guy died for his country. Let's show him a little respect and not pretend like he's a dumbass that was chasing a planet that's, however far away.
Yeah. Well, he was recognized by his hometown. The Simpson County Historical Society erected a historical marker honoring his contribution and his sacrifice in September of 2001. And it does seem like a lot of people have come out saying that they don't believe that this guy would have done that. He has family members, people that were with him, people who were involved in the military at the time, who all say he wouldn't have just gone after a balloon.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm surprised that the military didn't come out and say, like, he was mentally unstable. We think it may be a suicide, But the Clintons weren't around yet.
No, yeah, that was, what was that, Clinton Air Force Base, but not the same yet.
So yeah,
right, you want to move on?
All I got. Yeah, let's move on.
This one, it was last thing that I wanted to mention. If anybody else wants to be, I think you can still get in it if they still have it. The Patriots Point, which is a maritime museum in Mount Pleasant. Whatever. If you look up Patriots Point Museum, you'll find it. But the USS Yorktown is there. The USS Laffey is there. The Clamagore. They might have I think they have a Coast Guard cutter there that was put into service in World War II. But on the Yorktown, they have a bunch of old fighters, including a P-51 that you used to be able to get into when they were set up for doing that kind of thing. So that's super cool. If anybody wants some context or you're looking for a vacation spot, it's something cool to check out.
All right. Well, let's move on. What's on the menu tonight for me? Curse of Chief Cornstalk. Ryan, I joked with
Corncob.
Chief Corncob, but what would your Indian name be if you got to?
All I can think of is broken wind, clap like thunder. I think I got that from episode of Space Ghost Coast to Coast.
All right. What was that again?
Space Ghost Coast to Coast. Back when Cartoon Network had their Adult Swim thing, and they would do these like weird talk shows and stuff using old like Hanna-Barbera cartoons and things like that.
Yeah, I remember Space Ghost. All right, so that's your Indian name. All right, picture this, Space Ghost. You are in rural West Virginia, even though back in the time we're talking about it was all rural. So Chief Cornstalk was a Native American chief whose land had been annexed, I think they call it, which essentially means stolen by the government. So these settlers... Go ahead.
We recently found out that one of the neighborhoods here where I live has its own name that I'm not going to say because I don't need that. We were wondering like why is it called that, and we found out that it used to be its own town, and then it was annexed by the town that it's part of now. It's like, that's cool. A bigger town can just come around and be like, you're mine now.
Ridiculous. So yeah, there were a bunch of settlers, and they were on his tribe's land, which was sacred ground. So he got together with some other Algonquin tribes and attacked the local fort, but lost the battle because, muskets over arrows. And then he realized that he wouldn't be able to, defeat these settlers, and they were probably going to keep coming. So he wanted to make peace with them. Smart. So he and another local chief, whose name was much better, Red Hawk, visited the fort, and they tried to make friends. Like, hey, we know we haven't gotten along, but let's work this out. And instead, they were taken hostage because the settlers thought they'd be safe from Indian attacks if they had the chiefs as hostages. Makes sense, right? So, according to the settlers, these hostages were treated very well, I'm sure. And now Chief Cornstalk and Red Hawk even helped them plan out tactics to use against the British, which we know that this is one of the first times in war here in the Revolutionary War where people didn't wear bright red and blue costumes basically and just march into battle against each other. They used
shoot me first jackets.
Yeah, they adopted this more guerrilla style warfare, which allowed them to win. So Cornstalk's son, and I don't have his name handy right now, but he came to visit with a message, and they're like, "Oh, you have a message? Great. Yeah, come on in. You can go tell him, oh, you're hostage too." So at some point, a group of these settlers, I don't know if I believe they were out hunting or gathering, and they were attacked and killed by Indians, right? Now, we don't know for sure if these tribes even had anything to do with the hostages. You would assume that they would based on the the proximity, but you never know. But the settlers were pissed, and they kicked down the door to where all the Indian hostages were, and they shot Cornstalk's son right in front of him, and then shot Chief Cornstalk, and he cast a curse. The curse goes like this: I came to this fort as a friend, and you murdered me. You have murdered beside me my young son. For this, may the curse of the Great Spirit rest upon this land. May it be blighted by nature. May it be blighted in its hopes. And that's the end of it. When he died, he was given a, quote, proper burial. And I'm assuming that means that it was a white man's burial. You know what I mean?
Probably, it was not what he necessarily would have wanted. But also maybe not just like tossed into the woods.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like and this was all told by the settlers, so who knows? They could have burned his body in the, for fuel. And but that's what they said. Oh, we gave him a proper burial. But his body was moved in 1890 and again in 1950, so the land could be built on, for the settlers to make some cash. So they eventually built a monument right? To the soldiers who had defeated Cornstalk in the original battle. And right, I know. And then this statue or monument was allegedly struck by lightning twice, causing serious damage. So, do you believe in curses?
Yeah, I think I do. I think just given what we've said and seen with intention, even if it's nothing more than that, I believe in that kind of thing, and I believe in like that. I think it's twofold. I think the intention of the person doing it is one part of it, and then if the person on the receiving end believes it, that makes it probably doubly bad. Or just I really don't even think it's just that you'll perceive any little thing that goes wrong as part of the curse. I think it's that you are now putting out that intention that like bad stuff is going to keep happening to me, so it does.
I agree. So even if you don't, you will. So the town that sprung up in that area had a lot of things happen that sound like a curse to me. In 1880, a fire consumed an entire city block. In 1907, 310 men died in a mining disaster, the worst in U.S. history. In 1967, the Silver Bridge collapsed, killing 46 people. From 1968 to 1970, several aircraft crashed in the area, killing more than 100 men, women, and children.
Wow.
In 1978, a train derailment caused a hazardous spill, spoiling all of the wells in the area. Pretty crazy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now, is this looking a little bit stronger as a curse?
Looks like a curse. I mean, even if you fly over this land, you're going to have some kind of trouble. And I think especially the poisoning of the wells. I mean, he did say that this land will be blighted, and that's definitely a way to do it. He didn't say how it was going to happen or when it was going to happen, but that it would.
I mean, it seems pretty severe to me. I mean, it sounds like a curse. So, any idea what town we're talking about?
No.
Oh, good. We are talking about Point Pleasant, bitches. Point Pleasant is a city in Mason County, West Virginia. It's at the union of the Ohio and Kanawha rivers. And in 2020, at the census, the population was just over 4,100 people. So it is the principal city of the Point Pleasant micropolitan area that extends into Ohio, which sounds a lot like what you talked about, where, with good roads, good highways and stuff, these smaller areas can have more resources. So I think that's what they mean with the micropolitan area.
Yeah.
But do you have something to say?
No. I was just thinking that's probably what that. I'm not sure that I've heard that term before.
Yeah, I like it. So, what's so cryptique about Point Pleasant? So, let's take a trip back to November 15th, 1966, Ryan. Or should I say Space Ghost? Two young couples were out for a joyride in a classic 57 Chevy, cruising to a remote hangout spot called the TNT area. Sounds like a safe spot to chill, right? So this is just north of Point Pleasant. So in this car, you've got Linda and Roger Scarberry and their friends Steve and Mary Millette. So they're heading to this plant and the TNT area, and something caught their eye. A pair of huge red eyes glowing in the darkness, reflecting the car's headlights. So Steve is the first to spot it, and he's like, hey guys, what the hell is that? Which is a normal reaction. But those eyes obviously belong to some sort of creature, and they described it as a grayish man with wings. But it's not just any creature. It's like a half man, half monster, supposed to be around 6 or 7 feet tall, with fiery red eyes and wings folded against its back. And Linda apparently even noticed muscles in its legs. So that must be her fetish, right? Leg muscles.
She's checking them out.
Yeah.
Like, look at the gams on Mothman over here.
So they freak out, and they blaze out of there, man. Can't necessarily blame them, but I would have had to have kind of figured out what it was. But so they get out onto Route 62, or Route 62, whatever you want to say. Linda's screaming at Roger to, speed up, and they get around a curve and they spot the creature again. And this time it's supposed to be on a hill by a billboard. And then, like something out of a horror movie, it spreads its wings and takes off into the sky. Now they're all freaking out and they're still yelling at Roger to drive faster. But according to them, no matter how fast they go, this Mothman thing keeps up with them, gliding back and forth over their car. Now they say they're hitting over 100 miles per hour and it's still right there. So we're talking about something, and they say they're going 100 miles an hour. Let's say they're going 65. Okay. It's keeping up with them still at 65.
Yeah.
They can hear its wings hitting the car roof as it's flying over the top of them. And according to Roger, it left scratch marks on his roof of his car.
Maybe it wasn't wings. Maybe it was like claws or whatever, trying to get a hold of it.
Yeah, could be. And apparently it made a noise that Mary described as squeaking like a big mouse. So, yeah.
Okay.
It's funny that she's like, oh man, he had just these great muscular legs and squeaked like a mouse. So they allegedly managed to shake this thing off when they hit the edge of Point Pleasant, and the creature just vanished into thin air, veering off into a field. Jeepers creepers, right? So, yeah.
Just a terrible Tinder profile. Great gams, squeaks like a mouse, can fly at 100 miles an hour.
There's someone for everyone. So they're obviously shaken up, but what do they do next? So Linda's like, hey, we got to go to the cops. But Steve and Roger, like, they're just going to laugh at us. What do we say? We saw this 7-foot tall creature that flew 100 miles an hour. So they think about going back to check and see if it's still out there, but then they eventually chicken out. But as they're turning around, they came across a dead dog lying by the road, which mysteriously disappeared later on. And when it disappeared, Mothman jumps out from where the dog was, flies over their car, and disappears into the field on the other side. So eventually, after this incident, they're like, we got to go to the sheriff. So they go and talk to Deputy Millard Halstead. And at first he's skeptical, but he sees like, okay, this looks like they're actually afraid. This isn't somebody playing a joke. The fear seems authentic. Yeah. So he decides to investigate. And back in the day, I guess, they all go back out to the TNT area. So you would think, a police officer wouldn't be like, they'd be like, tell me exactly where. They wouldn't be like, take me to this area.
They'd be like, you need to be out of the way for this.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want 4 other people I have to protect besides myself.
Who are panicking.
Right.
Who barely got away from this thing the first time.
Right, exactly. So apparently at this time, there's some weird radio static, which, I mean, you can't consider radio static to be paranormal, really. But they did say that they saw some shadows circling nearby, but they find no sign of the Mothman. But this group of 4, they decide that they're going to just go back to the Scarberry's place, and they leave all the lights on and stay awake all night. So the next day, the sheriff, George Johnson, holds a press conference about the sightings. And of course, the local press is all over this thing. And they call the creature the Mothman. And so Steve this is a quote from him. He said, I guess this went to the press. He says, yeah, we know folks are laughing, but we ain't making this up. So that's interesting. They also said at one point that this Mothman creature was out in front of the car, and it was keeping up with them still, basically hovering at this, high rate of speed in front of them and flying backwards, looking at them. So that becomes important in our kind of review, I guess. But that's not the end of the story. So the next day, they head back to the TNT area in the daylight, and they found some bizarre tracks that they described as looking like two horseshoes put together but smooth. I don't really understand what that's supposed to mean, if they're supposed to be side by side, if they're supposed to be front to back, front to front, but that's how it was described. So Steve spotted something flying up inside a boiler when they kick open a door, but they don't stick around long enough to see what it is. So I don't know exactly what was in this TNT area. So it was described as a boiler, but that may not be an accurate description because we're getting it from someone who may not understand exactly what, each building or whatever is in this area. Yeah. Right. So do you know the difference between eye shine and glowing?
Yeah. Eye shine would be a reflection of an external light source, where glowing would be illuminated from within, I would assume, right? Kind of the most basic definition.
100%. So yeah, if something is described as glowing, it's self-illuminated. If it is eye shine, it is a reflection. We talk about this in Bigfoot cases and stuff. So there's a big difference. There are a lot of creatures that have eye shine, which, as I understand it, reflects from the back of their eye, which gives them better night vision, but it causes this reflection. Now, if something's glowing, that's bioluminescence, and we don't see that in anything outside of aquatic creatures, as far as I know. So that is not something that any terrestrial land or bird, mammal or bird has that I'm aware of, because I think that would be a big deal. I think that would be out there. Hey, this bird has bioluminescence in its eyes. Yeah. So
everybody be buying them to put in their kids' rooms for night lights.
Exactly. So that's the difference, and that's important. Now we are going to talk about. Well, I'm going to hold off on this. We'll get back to this. So let's move on. It didn't end there. So in November of 1966, there were some grave diggers working at a cemetery in Clendenin, West Virginia, which is very close, and they spotted a strange man-like figure in the trees above them. So let's see. There were more people that claimed that they had Mothman sightings, but they weren't really worth getting into, I guess, because we've got the main sighting that sparked everything. And then so this Mason County Sheriff George Johnson, now he said he thought it was just a big bird with red eyes, calling it a shite poke, which is a great name. That is kind of a local term for the American bittern, and that is much smaller than a crane. It almost looks like a crane would, only it doesn't have the super long neck.
Okay.
So then there's and we can I've got photos to send for you to put up. So this one guy, Newell Partridge, swore he saw its eyes light up like bicycle reflectors when he shined a flashlight on it. So that would be eye shine.
Right.
But cranes and bitterns do not have eye shine. So, I mean, I guess there's a possibility that, we always have to look at that these birds, could have a genetic defect, or something wrong with their eyes or something like that would cause it to reflect, but that would be a single bird, right? It'd be like humans can have giantism, but it's extremely rare. So
right, or alopecia or whatever. Like there are things that can alter your appearance, but they don't affect the whole population.
Exactly. So he blamed this creature for messing with his TV and even snatching his German Shepherd. So yeah, so he's being blamed for some stuff. just to put this out there, German Shepherds weigh from 65 to 90 pounds. So that's a lot to carry off, right?
Yeah.
So there's this guy from West Virginia University, Robert L. Smith, and he came out by saying that it was a sandhill crane, a tall bird with a wingspan as wide as a person is tall. So we're talking about 6 feet. It's a big wingspan, right?
Yeah.
Huge. Now, so these birds can get lost during migration sometimes. So they do end up in places they shouldn't be, like scaring the shit out of people in Point Pleasant, I guess. So we are on the lookout for a sandhill crane that exhibits eye shine that's big enough to fly off with the German Shepherd. So
that'd be a big one.
Yeah, you got to, we don't have to take everything into effect and into account. And honestly, this guy sounds a little funny that he's like, I was messing with my TV. Mothman's like, you got 6 channels, you lucky motherfucker. I'm gonna block out 2 of them. So yeah. Anyway, so sandhill cranes, and we'll put a picture up, have a red coloring around their eyes and a huge wingspan, but they cannot hover or fly backward, right? So hummingbird's the only thing I'm aware of that's a bird that can hover or fly backwards. And sandhill cranes can reach speeds up to 35 miles an hour. Now it's possible that, one has gone faster, but the kind of agreed upon top speed is 35 miles per hour. And that would be if they're getting out of Dodge, or I guess if they're diving. But it's not something where they're flying over 25 miles an hour consistent, right?
And they're not chasing cars at 100 miles an hour or whatever they think.
Yeah, and even though they're huge, and I didn't put this in, look up what the average weight is for a sandhill crane while I keep going, because it's a lot lighter than you would probably think. So moving on, as you look that up for me, I appreciate that. So there was the Batman comics, right? Not the show, but the comics. And there's this guy, Killer Moth, that's in there, which it's like, man, are you running out of villains that fast? Killer Moth. But the press named this thing the Mothman, and that may have been, where it came from, was this killer moth. Did you pull up a weight on those guys?
7.5 to 11 pounds. So pretty small, pretty light.
So you need a wingspan.
Not small, light.
Yeah. So you need a wingspan of 6 feet to pull less than 20 pounds.
So I was looking, I think it's golden eagles that are the ones that would like pick up a goat and drop it off a cliff.
Okay, go ahead.
And they have a wingspan of like 8 feet, 6 to 8 feet.
Okay.
But they're also not like picking them up and flying long distance.
They're knocking them off cliffs usually.
They're like picking them up, carrying them a couple, like just there's cliff here, 2 feet over here, there's not cliff. That's how far they carry them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more of a consensus that they knock them off and not pick them up and drop them. Although some animals have done that, but that's beside the point. So let's just say your wingspan has to be 6 feet for 20 pounds. Just, for something that we can, kind of pick apart. Now, if you're 7 foot tall humanoid and you've got these buff legs, let's say that this Mothman weighs 100 pounds. So you would need, if my math is right, which it's usually not, if you're going to lift 100 pounds and you're going to keep the same percentages as this sandhill crane, your wingspan would have to be over 40 feet. That's an airplane, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Cessnas they don't have a 40-foot wingspan. So that's what we're looking at if this is a real thing. Or we could be looking at something where the wings are more of a decoration. They're not needed. This creature can fly, through some other means. The wings are part of how it appears to people, whatever. But a 10, 15, 20-foot wingspan isn't pulling somebody that weighs 200 pounds and is carrying a German Shepherd. Never thought I'd say that, but here we are. So let's move forward. December 15th, 1967, the Silver Bridge, which we talked about, collapsed, and 46 people died from falling into a river in their cars and drowning or dying from the impact. Pretty bad. But of course, so now everybody's like, oh, it was the Mothman. The Mothman did it. Sounds ridiculous, right? The Mothman caused this bridge to collapse. But there is a picture of something very Mothman-y at the bridge just before the collapse. And we'll put that picture up too. So that is kind of the end of what I have on the Mothman, but there is a little bit more. So in 1999, Russian ufologists claimed they saw the Mothman hanging around Moscow, and that was before a bunch of apartment bombings. So there's that. They made a.
Are they saying is the idea that it's related or it's like an omen?
I think that it's like a harbinger of doom is what they're saying.
Yeah, like it appears and then bad stuff follows. Okay.
Yeah. So they even made a movie about it. Pretty good movie. The Mothman Prophecies in 2002. And that starred well-known gerbil activist Richard Gere. So it is, you don't get that reference?
No, I'm afraid to ask.
So for the longest time, there was this rumor that Richard Gere had to go to the emergency room because he had a gerbil in his anus.
Yeah. I thought it was that's what I was afraid you were going to say because I heard that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What did they call that? Never mind. Yeah. Oh my God. I just said something I shouldn't.
That's a whole other show. So this book came out in 1975 and the author was John Keel. So it's a good movie. It's probably a better book, but I don't know. It's not like a documentary on the things that happened, right? There's a lot of
dramatization.
Yeah. So, but in 2016, someone claimed they snapped a photo of Mothman while driving down Route 2 in Mason County. Science writer Sharon A. Hill thinks it might just be a bird carrying its dinner like a frog or a snake. And we'll put that picture up. To me, it looks like an owl with a snake, but who knows? Guess we'll never know for sure. But that's what keeps the mysteries alive. That's right. So, according to Jan Harold Brunvand, Mothman has had its fair share of attention in the press. Some folks tied his sightings to UFOs or claimed that he was hanging out at the military storage site. And Brunvand mentioned how the tales of the Mothman in 66 and 67 talk about a bunch of people seeing him, with even more folks too spooked to speak up.
Too spooked to speak?
Yeah.
It's a good album name.
Now, he also found that a lot of these stories come from sources like kids' books or sensationalized accounts without any real witnesses, which is a problem if you're trying to get to the truth.
Yeah, stories like this always have that element of like the telephone game. Stories told and retold, and people want to tell it in a dramatic way.
It's true.
One of my uncles used to share stories from his time in the military or whatever, anything that he was talking about. And my dad, would be like, you probably can't believe everything he's saying. It's like, I've known this guy for like 40 years and, details get added almost every time he retells it. All of a sudden he remembers which way he was looking or what somebody said or a quip or some whatever other detail. But it's like when you're trying to find out something factually, that's rough. And then getting people excited about it. And they're like, well, I think its wings were this big. And it was, we were doing 100 miles an hour. Like you were saying, doing 100 miles an hour. Who knows what kind of vehicle this was back then.
It was a 57 Chevy. I don't know that I would want to go over 100 miles an hour in a car built in 1957.
I don't think I'd want to go. Yeah. Let's see. Chevy Bel Air top speed 128. I mean, cars have like theoretical top speeds you probably wouldn't want to reach. My old Camaro could, I think, theoretically hit like 150. I would not have wanted to try to do that. And that's a modern aerodynamic thing. That was a 2015. It's like, I don't think so.
I hear you.
Yeah. And especially, when did this was 66?
Yeah.
So, the road's going to, anyway, it's just.
And it would have been 9 years old, too.
Yeah, just an example of something they could have embellished.
Yeah. All right. So Mothman is done, right? Not so fast, Space Ghost. So a couple in Chicago say that they saw a Mothman, and they reported this on Lon Strickler's website. And it's a great resource. It's a great website. But he focuses a lot on winged humanoid. So this is what this couple said that they saw. And this is a quote. So then suddenly the large winged being slowing descended in front of them, no more than 25 feet away. It hovered about 5 feet above the sidewalk, its wings spread open as it peered at the couple with large, bright red eyes that slowly altered back and forth in intensity. Several people on the other side of the street, including a delivery driver, reacted with screams and frightened yelps. The winged being hovered for 10 seconds, then quickly pulled the wings into its body and shot up quickly into the night sky. End quote.
Pulled the wings into his body. Does that mean like drew in to take off, or took off through another means?
I'm assuming that it means that it pulled them in, like folded them in, not sucked them into its body, and flew. Meaning that gives a little bit of credence to maybe this creature doesn't need a 40-foot wingspan if it's a real thing. So this guy, University of Chicago psychologist David A. Gallo, thinks that it's more about who's reporting the sightings. People who have already believed in paranormal stuff might be more likely to see something strange, which I would counter with people that don't believe in the paranormal will make up a ridiculous thing as well. You know, it was swamp gas, it was ball lightning, that sort of thing. Some people think Mothman's an alien, and some people think it's a supernatural being or a new species of cryptid. I'm thinking, you know, what about maybe a dark angel, something like that with the wings? But in 2002, Point Pleasant decided to throw a party, the annual Mothman Festival. Why? The folks there were looking for a creative way to draw people to their town, and they hit the jackpot. Mothman, good stuff. Jeff Wamsley, who came up with the event and kind of runs it all the time and stuff, he said that on average about 10 to 12,000 people come to the festival each year. So good for them. So they have a massive 12-foot tall metallic statue of the Mothman, and that was brought in 2003. We'll have a picture of that. It's pretty cool. And they've got a Mothman Museum and Research Center that's been open since 2005. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah,
so
cool.
If you want to go to the Mothman party, it's every third weekend in December. So
that is very cool.
Yeah.
There's a party that I'd like to go to. It's like a Krampus thing that they do in Italy, apparently. Because James May has this series of shows on Amazon where it's like he does Japan, he does Italy. I think he's doing India next, something like that. But he was doing the one in India in Italy, where he goes to this celebration where they've got everybody in these costumes and these like incredible masks and stuff like that. And he's like, he can't see anything, and he's just complaining about it the whole time. He's like, the suit's hot, this is uncomfortable. And then it cuts and he's like sitting in this cafe, like watching it through the window.
It's awesome.
Like with the mask off, he's like, "No, I'm not doing that anymore." And like one of the guys in the full costume comes up to the window and he's like, he's like, as he's drinking his coffee or whatever.
That's awesome. I need to take like a 20-second break.
Okay.
I'll be right back.
Take care of.
Yeah. All right. So if you want to visit this festival, which I would love to, I mean, it's kind of a hike for us to drive there.
Dress up as Mothman?
We could. They actually they actually have a like a really high quality Mothman costume on display at the museum. So that's pretty cool. But so there's guest speakers, of course, vendors, selling all kinds of Mothman stuff, and a pancake eating contest because, Mothman pancakes. And then there's hayride tours taking you around to all the spooky spots in the town.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. So what do you think about the Curse of Chief Cornstalk to begin with?
Real. I think it's real. I think again, like whether you think it's magic or intention or whatever, I think there definitely seems to be quite a lot that's happened to this place to suggest that something is wrong with it.
It's hard to deny. Now, you might be able to say, well, I don't believe he put this curse on this place, but it's hard to deny that there's a curse on the place, right? Yeah. And it hasn't had any recent tragedies that I know of, and maybe they've appeased the Mothman with this festival. You know, he's like,
could be.
Oh, now everybody's talking about me. I'm the toast of the town again. I don't have to scare people anymore. So yeah, I'm going 100% on it being cursed and 99% that it's, Chief Cornstalk, Red Hawk, and Child. So do you think that the Mothman, the main story is the one we went over. Do you think that most of this is true? Most of it isn't true, or it's kind of true, but they added a lot?
I think there's probably some truth to it, but that a lot of it's been embellished over the years with retellings. I mean, we're talking about, just the physics of it don't really make sense, because Golden Eagle, which is the one that'll knock goats off cliffs, according to what I'm reading, can only lift about 8 pounds with like a 7.5 foot wingspan.
Yeah.
So to get something that will carry off somebody's German Shepherd to where they can't find it just seems like it'd be hard for it to find a spot to even come down.
Yeah.
To break something up, because it's got to carry its own body weight plus that, so it's got to be huge, or it has to have some other form of like propulsion.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not. If it's a 12-foot wingspan, it's not big enough. If a German Shepherd had a 12-foot wingspan, it couldn't get off the ground. It's up to jump.
Yeah.
So, all right. So could it be a crane or a bittern? A shite poke, if you will.
I mean, I think it's possible that that's maybe something people have seen. Like you're talking about the photo where it's carrying something, and it's probably some kind of large bird that's been misidentified. I don't know. I think they really saw something. I just don't know if it was like a paranormal thing or not.
Right.
I like the Mothman story, and that there are so many of them. It kind of lends credibility to it, but it's tough to say that it's not just a large bird, especially since there's nothing that we can back up. Like we can't. It just seems so improbable that something that would have to be so big would only be seen by a small number of people. Like if there was any population of these things flying around, it would like blot out the sky. It would just be these giant winged creatures with their sculpted legs all over the place.
Mothman never skips leg day, buddy. That's why he's got to have those massive legs to get started. But I think scientifically, unless there's some other form of propulsion, it cannot be, because, if I can see a blue heron, which we have all over the place here in Missouri, I can see them from pretty far away because they're so big. Now, when I'm looking in the sky, I'm not a trained pilot. I can't say, oh, that thing's 600 yards away. I mean, I could take my rifle out and figure it out, but neighbors would probably, not want that. But I couldn't tell you if it's, a half a mile away or a quarter mile away. But if something had a 40-foot wingspan and got above the tree line, which it would have to, you would see it from a couple miles away. Maybe you may think it's it's going to look a lot smaller. You may not think, oh my gosh, what is that? But you would be able to see it from far, far, far away with a 40-foot wingspan.
Yeah.
So if it's using its wings alone to fly, it cannot be that big. And if it's using those wings to fly, it has to be that big. The wings have to be that big. So,
and this is not
it has to be because it has.
Yeah, this is not it has to be because it has to be thing either. This is just physically doesn't make sense the other way.
Right. So, yeah, unless he's got a jetpack underneath there. it's
I mean, the only
not
reason
working.
the airplanes work the way they do is because of the speed they achieve.
Right. The
It's
massive power that it takes to get them going is,
they
crazy.
would not be able to glide at low speed the way they are.
So it could, the sandhill crane could be responsible for some of them. Could be. It's not the bittern. Bittern's tiny, and to say that is almost disrespectful. So do you think there's any chance that Mothman could have been somewhat responsible for the bridge collapse?
I lean more towards the Harbinger thing.
Yeah.
That if there is a paranormal aspect to it, then it's seen in advance of this. I mean, we see that all over the place. The things are an omen of bad things to go, like black cats, or an omen that say bad luck's going to come.
Yeah. I don't think that the Mothman was, up there unscrewing bolts.
Plans for.
I also, the way I understand it, they figured out why the bridge collapsed, and it wasn't from a 40-foot winged creature pushing it over. I believe it was an engineering failure where they used the wrong kind of like material for some bolts or something like that. They weren't rated to hold as much weight as they were supposed to, something along those lines. So if it's real, what could Mothman be?
I have no idea. I have no theories at all as to what it could be.
I do. You want to hear mine?
Yeah.
It is the spirit of Chief Cornstalk.
Yeah. Like a tulpa that he created before he died. Yeah. I can see that.
And so your homework, Crypt Keepers, is to look into Algonquin legend and find out if there's a creature similar to the Mothman, because maybe this is some sort of spirit that's been there forever, and it's not an actual physical being. It is, presenting itself how it wants to be seen. And maybe it's Chief Cornstalk. Who knows? Maybe it's Red Hawk. Who knows? But that's the only explanation that I can come up with that makes sense. And
and it would explain the physical aspects of it. That it's not physical. It's not obeying the rules of just how lift works.
Right. So in a somewhat related story, in 2019, Senator Joe Manchin, I'm assuming is how you say his name, from West Virginia, wrote, he tweeted a photo of himself posing in front of the Mothman statue, and he was wishing Mason County residents a happy Mothman festival. And so Donald Trump quote tweeted Senator Joe Manchin and said, "I go along with Joe." So Trump is down with the Mothman. I love it.
Mothman might vote Trump.
Could be. Well, yeah. I mean, if he doesn't have to show an ID, walk in and no, I'm the Mothman. Are you sure? You've got
first state your first name, last name, and occupation. He's like Mothman, and Mothman.
Well, how do we know it's really you? Just check out these quads on the front of my legs here.
Yeah, he just kicks his foot up on the desk. He's like, check it out. Observe, like it's oiled up.
Right. These are all natural, baby. No interference here. All right, so that's all I've got on Chief Cornstalk and the Mothman. So give us your final thoughts. Let us know what you think at cryptiquepodcast@gmail.com. That's all we've got for you tonight on Cryptique. You want to tell them what they need to know, or you want me to run through it?
Why don't you run through it?
All right. So please like, subscribe, and share. Socials are going to all be in the notes. If you haven't done so already, check out the YouTube channel. We've got videos of all of our new podcasts with pictures and video and all sorts of cool stuff. For a small one-time donation, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/cryptiquepi. You can check out our slick designs on merchandise at cryptiquepodcaststore.com. And remember, as John Keel said, the unknown is always frightening. There's no human experience more compelling than facing a monster. Good evening, Crypt Keepers.